long, broad. Once upon a time there lived a king who had an only son whom he loved dearly. Now one day the king sent for his son and said to him, "My dearest child, my hair is gray and I am old, and soon I shall feel no more warmth from the sun or look upon the trees and flowers. But before I die I should like to see you with a good wife. Therefore marry, my son, as speedily as possible." "My father," the prince replied, "now and always I ask nothing better than to do your bidding, but I know of no daughter-in-law that I could give you." On hearing these words, the old king drew from his pockets a key of gold and gave it to his son. "Go up the staircase, right to the top of the tower. Look carefully around you, and then come and tell me which you like best of all that you see." So the young man went up and had never before been in the tower, and had no idea what it might contain. The staircase wound round and round and round till the prince was almost giddy, and every now and then he caught sight of a large room that opened out from the side. He had been told to go to the top, and to the top he went. Then he found himself in a hall which had an iron door at one end. This door he unlocked with a golden key, and he passed through into a vast chamber which had the roof of blue sprinkled with golden stars, and a carpet of green soft silk as turf. 12 windows framed in gold let in the light from the sun, and on every window was painted a figure of a young girl, each more beautiful than the last. While the prince gazed at them in surprise, not knowing which he liked best, the girls began to lift their eyes and smile at him. He waited, expecting them to speak, but no sound came. Suddenly he noticed that one of the windows was covered by a curtain of white silk. He lifted it and saw before him the image of a maiden beautiful as the day and sad as the tomb, clothed in a white robe and having a girdle of silver and a crown of pearls. The prince stood and gazed at her, as if he had been turned into stone, but as he looked, the sadness on her face seemed to pass into his heart. He cried out, "This one shall be my wife, this one and no other." As he said the words, the young girl blushed and hung her head, and all the other figures vanished. The young prince went quickly back to his father and told him all that he had seen and which wife he had chosen. The old man listened to him, full of sorrow, and then he spoke. "You have done ill, my son, to search out that which was hidden, and you are running to meet great danger. This young girl has fallen into the power of a wicked sorcerer who lives in an iron castle. Many young men have tried to deliver her, and none have come back. But what is done is done. You have given your word, and it cannot be broken. Go, dare your fate, and return to me safe and sound." So the prince embraced his father and mounted his horse and set forth to seek his bride. He rode on gaily for several hours, till he found himself in the woods, where he had never seen before, and soon lost his way among its winding paths and deep valleys. He tried in vain to see where he was. The thick trees shut out the sun, and he could not tell which was north and which was south, so that he might know the direction to make for. He felt in despair, and had quite given up all hope of getting out of this horrible place, when he heard a voice calling out to him, "Hey, stop for a minute!" The prince turned around and saw behind him a very tall man running as fast as his legs could carry him. "Wait for me, and take me into your service. If you do, you will never be sorry." "Who are you, and what can you do?"
"Long is my name, and I can lengthen my body at will. Do you see that nest up there, top of the pine tree? Well, I can get it for you without taking the trouble of climbing the tree."
And Long stretched himself up and up and up until he was very soon as tall as the pine tree himself. He put the nest in his pocket, and before you could wink your eyelid he had made himself small again, and stood before the prince. "Yes, you know your business," he said, "but birds' nests are of no use to me. I am too old for them. Now, if you were only able to get me out of this wood, you would indeed be good for something."
"Oh, there's no difficulty in that," replied Long,
and he stretched himself up and up and up till he was 3 times as tall as the tallest tree in the forest. Then he looked around and said,
"We must go in this direction in order to get out of the wood."
And he shortened himself, and he took the prince's horse by the bridle and led him along. Very soon they got clear of the forest and saw before them a wide plain extending in a pile of rocks, covered here and there with trees, and very much like the fortifications of a town. As they left the wood long behind them, Long turned to the prince and said,
"My lord, here comes my comrade. You should take him into your service too."
"Well, call him then, so that I can see what sort of man he is."
"He's a little far off for that," replied Long. "He would hardly hear my voice, but he couldn't be here for some time yet. He has too much to carry. I think I'd better go and bring him myself."
And this time he stretched himself at such a height that his head was lost in the clouds. He made 2 or 3 strides and took his friend on his back, then set him down before the prince. This newcomer was a very fat man, as round as a barrel. "Who are you, and what can you do?"
Your worship, my name is Broad, and I can make myself as wide as I please."
"Let me see how you manage it."
"Run, my lord, as fast as you can, and hide yourself in the wood,"
cried Broad, and he began to swell himself out. The prince did not understand why he'd run into the wood, but when he saw Long flying towards it, he thought he had better follow his example. He was only just in time, for Broad had so suddenly inflated himself that the very nearly knocked the prince over, and his horse too. He covered all the space for acres around. You would have thought he was a mountain. At length, Broad ceased to expand and drew a few deep breaths that made the whole forest tremble, and shrank down to his normal size. "You have made me run away," said the prince, "but it is not every day one can meet with a man of your sort. I will take you into my service." So the 3 companions continued on their journey, and when they were drawing near the rocks, met a man whose eyes were covered by a bandage.
"Your Excellency," said Long, "this is our 3rd comrade. You will do well to take him into your service, and I assure you, you will find him worth his salt."
"Who are you?" asked the prince, "and why are your eyes bandaged? You can never see your way."
"'Tis the contrary, my lord. It is because I see only too well that I am forced to bandage my eyes. Even so, I see as well as people who have no bandage. When I take it off my eyes, they pierce through everything. Everything I look at catches fire, or if it cannot catch fire, it falls into 1,000 pieces. So they call me Quickeye."
And so saying, he took off his bandage and turned towards the rock. As he fixed his eyes upon it, a crack was heard. In a few moments it was nothing but a heap of sand. In the sand, something might have been detected glittering and brightly. Quickeye picked it up and brought it to the prince. It turned out to be a lump of pure gold. "You are a wonderful creature," said the prince, "and I should be a fool not to take you into my service. But since your eyes are so good, can you tell me if I'm very far from the Iron Castle, and what is happening there just now?"
"If you are traveling alone," replied Quickeye, "it would take you at least a year to get to it, but as we are with you, we shall arrive there tonight. Just now they are preparing supper."
"There's the princess in the castle. Do you see her?"
Wizard keeps her high in a tower, guarded by iron bars."
"Help me deliver her," cried the prince. And they promised they would. Then they all set out through the grey rocks, by the breach made by the eyes of Quickeye, and passed over the great mountains and through. Every time they met an obstacle, the three friends contrived somehow to put it aside. As the sun was setting, the prince beheld the towers of the Iron Castle, and before it sank beneath the horizon, he was crossing the iron bridge which led to its gates. He was only just in time, for no sooner had the sun disappeared altogether than the bridge drew itself up, and the gates shut themselves. There was no turning back now. The prince put up his horse in the stable, and made sure everything looked as if it were a guest we were expecting. Then the whole party marched straight up to the castle. In the courts, in the stables, and all over the great halls, they saw a number of men richly dressed, but every one turned into stone. They crossed an endless set of rooms, all opened into each other, till they reached the dining hall. It was brilliantly lighted. The table was covered with wine and fruit, and was so laid for four. They waited a few minutes expecting someone to come, but as nobody did, they sat down and began to eat and drink, for they were very hungry. But when they had done their supper, they looked about for some place to sleep. But suddenly the door burst open, and the wizard entered the hall. He was old and humpbacked, with a bald head and a gray beard that fell to his knees. He wore a black robe, and instead of belt, 3 iron circlets clapped his waist. He led by the hand a lady of wonderful beauty, dressed in white, with a silver girdle and a crown of pearls, but her face was pale and sad as death itself. The prince knew her in an instant, but moved eagerly.
"I know why you are here. Very good. You may have her if for 3 nights following you can prevent her from making an escape. If you fail in this, you and your servants will all be turned to stone, like those who have come before you."
And, offering the princess a chair, he left the hall. The prince could not take his eyes off of the princess, as she was so lovely. He began to talk to her, but she neither answered nor smiled, and sat as if she were made of marble. He seated himself by her, and determined not to close his eyes for that night, for fear she would escape him. And in order that she should be doubly guarded, Long stretched himself like a strap around the room. Broad took his stand by the door and puffed himself out so that not even a mouse could slip by. And Quickeye leaned against a pillar which stood in the middle of the floor and supported the roof. But in half a second, they were all sound asleep, and they slept sound the whole night long. In the morning, at the first peep of dawn, the prince awoke with a start. But the princess was gone. He roused his servants and implored them to tell him what he must do. "Calm yourself, my lord," said Quickeye. "I have found her already. 100 miles from here there's a forest. In the middle of the forest an old oak, and on the top of the oak an acorn. The acorn is the princess.
If Long will take me on his shoulders, we shall soon be back with her. And sure enough, in less than the time it takes to walk around a cottage, they had returned from the forest, and the prince was presented with the acorn. Now, your excellency, throw it on the ground. The prince obeyed, and was enchanted to see the princess appear at his side. But when the sun peeped for the first time over the mountains, the door burst open as before, and the wizard entered with a loud laugh. Suddenly, he caught sight of the princess, and his face darkened. He uttered a low growl, and one of the iron circlets gave way with a crash. He seized the young girl by the hand and bore her away with him. All that day, the prince wandered around the castle and studying the curious treasures it contained, but everything looked as if life had suddenly come to a standstill. In one place he saw a prince who had been turned into stone in the act of brandishing his sword round, which his two hands were clasped on. And another, the same doom had fallen upon a knight in the act of running away. And the third, a serving man, was standing eternally trying to convey a piece of beef to his mouth. And all around them were others, still preserving for evermore the attitudes they were in when the wizard commanded, "From henceforth be turned into marble!" In the castle, and around the castle, all was dismal and desolate. Trees were there, but without leaves. Fields were there, but no grass grew on them. There was one river, but it never flowed, and no fish lived in it. No flowers blossomed, no birds sang. 3 times during the day food appeared, as if by magic, for the prince and his servants. And it was not until supper was ended that the wizard appeared, as on the previous evening, and delivered the princess into the care of the prince. All 4 determined this time that they would keep awake at any cost. But it was no use. Off they went as they had done before, and when the prince awoke the next morning, the room was again empty. With a pang of shame, he rushed to Quickeye. "Awake, awake, Quickeye! Do you know where the princess is?" Quickeye rubbed his eyes and answered, "Oh, yes, I see her. 200 miles from here there's a mountain, and this mountain is a rock, and the rock a precious stone. The stone is a princess. Long shall take me there, and we shall have her back before you can turn around." So Long took him on his shoulders, and they set out. At every stride, they covered 20 miles, and as they drew near, Quickeye fixed his burning eye on the mountain, and in an instant it split into 1,000 pieces, and in one of these sparkled the precious stone. They picked it up and brought it to the prince, who flung it hastily down. As the stone touched the floor, the princess stood before him. When the wizard came in, his eyes shot forth in flame and fury. Crick, crack was heard. Another of his iron bands broke off and fell. He seized the princess by his hand and led her off, growling louder than ever. All that day, things went on exactly as they had done the day before. After supper, the wizard brought back the princess, and looking straight in the eyes, he said, "We shall see which of us 2 will gain the prize after all." That night they struggled their hardest to keep awake, and even walked about instead of sitting down. But it was quite useless. One after another they had to give in, and for the 3rd time the princess slipped through their fingers. When morning came, it was as usual the prince who woke first, and as usual the princess being gone, he rushed to Quickeye. Get up, Quickeye, and tell me where the princess is." Quickeye looked about for some time without answering. "Oh, my lord, she is very far.
300 miles wide that lies in the Black Sea, and in the middle of the sea there's this little shell, and in the middle of the shell is fixed a gold ring. And the gold ring is a princess, but do not vex your soul, we will get her. Only today Long must take Broad with him. He will be wanted badly. So Long took Quickeye on his shoulder and Broad on the other, and they set out. Each stride they left 30 miles behind them. When they reached the Black Sea, Quickeye showed them the spot where they must seek the shell. But though Long stretched down his hand as far as he would, he could not find the shell, for it lay at the bottom of the sea.
"Wait a minute, comrades. It will be all right. I will help you," said Broad.
Then he swelled himself up so that you would have thought the world could hardly have held him. And stooping down, he drank. He drank so much at every mouthful that only a minute or so had passed before the water had sunk low enough for Long to put his hand to the bottom. He soon found the shell and pulled out the ring, but time had been lost, and Long had to double burden to carry. Dawn was breaking fast before they got back to the castle, where the prince was waiting for them in agony of fear. Soon the first rays of the sun were seen peeping over the tops of the mountain. The door burst open, and finding the prince standing alone, the wizard broke into peals of wicked laughter. But as he laughed, a loud crash was heard, and the window fell into 1,000 pieces. A gold ring glittered in the air, and the princess stood before the enchanter. For Quickeye, who was watching from afar, had told Long of the terrible danger now threatening the prince, and Long, summoning all his strength for one gigantic effort, had thrown the ring right through the window. As the wizard shrieked and howled with rage, till the whole castle trembled in its foundations. Then a crash was heard, and the third band split in two. Then the princess at length broke the enchanted silence, and blushing like a rose, she gave the prince her thanks for her unlooked-for deliverance. But it was not the only princess who was restored to life by the flight of the wicked Black Crow. The marble figures became men once more, and took up their occupations just as they had left before. The horses neighed in the stables, the flowers blossomed in the gardens, the birds flew in the air, and the fish darted about in the water. Everywhere you looked, all was life, all was joy. And the knights who had been turned into stone came in a body to offer their homage to the prince who had set them free. "Do not thank me," he said, "for I have done nothing. Without my faithful servants, Long, Broad, and Quickeye, I should have even been one of you." With these words, he bade them farewell, and departed with the princess and his faithful companions for the kingdom of his father. The old king, who had long since given up all hope, wept for joy at the sight of his son, and insisted that the wedding should take place as soon as possible. All of the knights who had been enchanted in the Iron Castle were invited to the ceremony, and after it had taken place, Long, Broad, and Quickeye took leave of the young couple, saying that they were going to look for more work to do. The prince offered them all their hearts could desire if they would only remain with him, but they replied that an idle life would not please them, and they would never be happy unless they were busy. So they went away to seek their fortunes, and, for all I know,